Before we got started, sorry about the delay. My name's Cecilia Pascali. I'm sort of heading up the Governance and Regulation Unit working with Anita in DPTI and effectively putting in place this accreditation scheme that we're proposing as well. So lovely to be here and to meet you all. Thank you all for coming, and thanks also to everyone who's joining us on the live stream. I think you'll hopefully see and hear me, and you're in groups, I hope, or if you're by yourself, not a problem. Just bear with me while I address that. There's a mechanism on the live stream if you want to submit questions and comments. There should be a little comment bubble or something that you can see on that side of the screen, and you should be able to submit everything live. We will receive it live, so hopefully that will increase the amount of interaction that we can have with you guys through this session. For everyone else as well who's here, we've got a busy morning, but hopefully we will be able to get through it in a sensical way. I think we should. Starting off, Anita's going to give a presentation which is hopefully going to be as meaningful and interactive as you would like it to be on the scheme, and just key points from the discussion paper that we'd like to draw out and bring your attention to for your consideration and thought. Then we'll have just a short 10-minute break, which I'll announce before we go into the workshop part of the session today. There's a few questions that we want to put to you, ask you to think about them in groups. We've got a few really helpful facilitators here from the department that are going to help work that through with you as well. And the idea is that we just get as much feedback as possible. We can, I think my phones are on silent, I'll just check that, but if everyone can put their phones on silent, just because it'll probably come through the live stream as well, that'll be helpful. Now again, sorry, I should have said, anyone who sends anything through the live stream online, if you could include your email address, that way we know who sent it and we can address it accordingly. Everyone in here, obviously, we know who you are. So after the workshopping, we'll have a Q&A session as well, where Anita will be leading that. I'll be facilitating it and moderating it, obviously. But hopefully we can give you as much information as we can and also get as much helpful feedback as possible from you as well, which is the point of today. I'll hand over to Anita. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Cecilia. So some of you might have seen me go through some of what I'm going to talk about today before. So for those of you that have seen some of this, bear with me. And for those that did read the discussion paper in detail, bear with me. But it's always useful to give a bit of a summary beforehand to get your minds all thinking. Like Cecilia said, quite happy for questions to come in as you think of them, or to save them to the end of the presentation, depending whether you need to know that answer right then and there. So as you know, the accreditation scheme is being introduced under the new Planning, Development and Infrastructure Act. It's part of the new system that recognises how important the decisions we make are to our community. Planning and building decisions help us to shape the future, and good decision making takes some experience. Planning and building are important professions that require expertise, knowledge and training to be effective. So why an accreditation scheme? Some of the reasons why we look at an accreditation scheme is to think about how we make more professional decisions, and that's not suggesting that we're not making professional decisions now, but it is to say there's always areas that we can improve, and with a better scheme that recognises that professionalism, it provides you that opportunity. It also better recognises us as a profession. So for the planning and building profession in particular, and other professions that are allied to the work that we do, it recognises the skills and expertise that we make and our contribution to decision making. It also provides choices for applicants. So there are opportunities through the scheme to look at the private sector delivering certain decision making functions, as well as the public sector. One of the big emphases that we'd like to put on the scheme is better complaints, investigations and auditing processes to make sure that when complaints come in about decisions, they are fully investigated and resolved. It also provides for a central public register, so anyone that is registered under the scheme can be easily found through the SA Planning portal, and hopefully that can link into our e-planning solution. So you'll be able to go into the portal, see who's accredited and lodge your application online with the accredited professional. So lots of opportunities there on how we work it through. So when is accreditation required? So most of you will be familiar with the new assessment pathways that are articulated in the new Act, but just to remind a few of you who may be not as familiar with them, we do have an accepted form of development where, which can basically be dealt with through building certifiers because no planning approval is required, and those building certifiers will need to be accredited under the scheme. There's also accredited professionals for planning who will look at code-assessed development and deemed to satisfy development, and assessment managers who will also need to be accredited under the scheme. In terms of the assessment pathways, code-assessed development is also being looked at for assessment managers and assessment panels, as well as the more complex applications. The State Planning Commission will be responsible at the moment for impact assessed development, and the Minister particularly restricted forms, and the Minister for Planning for impact assessed, which is akin to our sort of major developments process. So the way it's established really is that there's a hierarchy of complexity of applications. So the most complex applications you would expect to go to assessment panels, and as you move down to more simple, straightforward applications with lower risk to the community, you can move down to the accredited professional scheme. One of the questions I've been asked quite a number of times is how does it work in the council office, so the council context. So the assessment manager provides that role that they support the panel. So they provide that practical advice to the panel on how it should operate, its decision-making processes, and also supporting them in their decision-making around development applications. Assessment managers can delegate down to staff, just like managers in councils tend to do now. So they can sub-delegate decisions down. They can be decision makers in their own right as well. So not all council planning staff will need to necessarily be accredited under the scheme, but they may be. So you may well choose to accredit, give your accreditation to your planning team. So what about the existing industry scheme? So how does this relate to those that are already part of a scheme already? So we already have in the building sphere, we have the Australian Institute of Building Surveyors and the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors. In planning, we've got the Planning Institute of Australia, and in the allied field professions, we've got Architects Accreditation Council of Australia, and you can see the rest on the screen. What this means is there are already a range of bodies out there that are looking at accreditation and CPD training and development, and that they need to be recognised for that contribution that they make at the moment. So while the advice that we have received throughout this process is that the department needs to provide some sort of support in terms of accreditation and certainly needs to play a role in that, we also value the role of some of these other bodies in providing that scheme. And I'll come to that a bit more in a minute. So how will it work for you? So you will have essentially a choice as somebody who wants to become accredited of either going through the SA Government accreditation scheme or going to a private accreditor. So those bodies that are already set up to provide accreditation can continue to do so. And there is open opportunities for that to expand. So if there were other bodies that would like to undertake the accreditation process, that would be available too. If you decide to come through the scheme within the government, you would need to submit all your requirements and be accredited under that scheme. Once you're accredited under either of those schemes, you come in and be registered. So that's really a paperwork process, except for, of course, it's electronic now, where we can maintain a register. So it's really an administrative function to say the paperwork that's been submitted is submitted, you come into DPTI, and we put it on the SA Planning portal, so maintaining that register. We think that works for us because having it on the portal means that it's with all other planning information, so people can easily access that information. and it also means that it can be connected into our long-term plan around the e-planning solution. So to become accredited, there are three main components, or two main components of it really. One is your qualifications, so what qualification you have, and there are a number of degrees and diplomas around the world that are held by building certifiers, planners and other allied professionals. And this diversity does support industry growth and innovation and should be supported under the new scheme. We also recognise the different levels of accreditation will require different levels of experience, and the experience will be based on what's accrued over time and will reflect experience gathered in specialist areas such as development assessment, policy, specific experience around particular land use, heritage, and there may be a range of other design and heritage type disciplines. A CV should be lodged that shows your employment history with references to satisfy that requirement. So it's your application includes your CV and any references there. Now we also recognise that there are times when people will not have the relevant qualification, and I know this has been raised with me a number of times out in more regional areas, and there are opportunities to look at where there may be dispensation provided. Now they may demonstrate, may well have the experience but not the qualification. So we would need to evaluate that experience that's been gained and whether that in fact means that they can still be accredited. So look, I'm assuming that you've all gone through the levels a little bit, but in terms of how it will be determined, we have done a fair bit of work around what the existing industry schemes provide for, and where possible look to align ourselves with those schemes rather than reinvent this altogether. And that means that people will have a transitional path from their current scheme into the new scheme. So in terms of the level 1 building certifier, they will be assessing against the building rules with no real limitation to that. They'll be able to undertake building inspections on behalf of the council. The relevant qualification they'll need and a minimum of 3 years of relevant experience in the industry. This is equivalent to the level 1 building surveyor by ABES or RICS. A building certifier level 2 will be assessing against the building rules. They will have some limitations in relation to height and scale of the building, and they will need 2 years qualification and 2 years experience, which is equivalent to the ABES and RICS scheme. So the level 3 is once again a narrower field of what you can assess, which is class 1 and class 10 buildings, and you need a relevant qualifications and 6 months experience, which is aligned with ABES and RICS. And there is one new level proposed, which does not at this point align with RICS and ABES, which is a building inspector. So this enables a person to undertake basic inspections of class 1 and 10 matters, including roof trusses, swimming pool safety and matters like that. They would need to demonstrate relevant experience and qualifications to achieve that. So that's one that's new for those in the building profession. In terms of planning, we have the assessment manager, which, like I said, I think is the most experienced person that you would expect to have in terms of the levels of accreditation. Assessment managers have really important roles, really critical that those people are well experienced. They'll be having some tough decisions to be made. They would be frequently delegated significant decisions from panels, and they may well also have to make quite significant decisions in their own right. So we are talking about someone having a relevant degree, qualification and a minimum of 6.5 years experience. And I recognise that that's, quite a bit of experience. Sorry, hay fever this morning, frog in my throat. But it is important given that the role that they will have in terms of making independent decisions. So that's equivalent to, from the Planning Institute scheme, a registered planner with, which is a full PM member with 5 years experience. So that means they need 1.5 years before becoming a registered planner, I think, Kim, and then 5 years after that. So that's how that works out. For assessment panel members, we really recognise the value of having people from a range of professions involved in assessment decisions at that level. Because it is a panel decision, it means it is the opportunity to have that ongoing conversation between various disciplines and to look at planning decisions from a range of angles. What this means is that we will be looking, this is the place where you would expect allied professionals in particular to have a more significant role, and those panel members would be expected to understand planning in broad terms but also bring other skill sets into the conversation. So for those members we're talking about a relevant degree or qualification, so that could be in an allied professional, and 2 years of full-time experience. Part of the reason it talks about 2 years experience for those allied professionals is that they are there for those skills in that particular profession, and they should be able to articulate those in a public way. So most panels run in a very public forum, and you need to have the experience behind you to have that conversation in the public realm. So important that people do have some level of experience before moving into that. So this is equivalent to the peer, full member and associate member or accreditation in an allied field. Excuse me. Did I not move those on? Looking at sorry, thanks. Okay, so then we have the level 3 accredited planning professional. It's largely expected that accredited professionals of this nature would deal with deemed to satisfy applications. One of the things that we have been talking about is that sometimes things do move into having a component of it assessed as a performance application. So for those that aren't that clear about what I mean, under the new scheme you'll have on your left hand side a set of performance outcomes in the code, and on the right hand side you have your deemed to satisfy solutions. Where you don't meet a deemed to satisfy solution, you need to go back to the performance outcome, and that component of the application becomes performance assessed. So this is one of the things that we will need to think about how that works, particularly if there is a notification procedure required. And certainly if you're talking about having a hearing of some kind, it generally does go to a panel to be heard, but that could be something that might differ between the regional areas and metro. So something I think would be worth exploring today when we work through the questions. I'd be interested in your views on that. The last one is around Land Division Accredited Professionals, Level 4. Now I understand there's been quite a lot of conversation out there in the planning world about what types of land divisions, if at all, would be supported, and I know some people are very supportive of it and others aren't, so we do have a diversity of views in the room. But I think one of the things we need to be conscious of is there are some really basic land division applications out there which are very straightforward, particularly if they meet all of the deemed to satisfy solutions in a code. For example, if it has the dimensions that are set up as deemed to satisfy requirements, it is something that can be dealt with fairly easily. I know in the paper we mentioned a public road. I don't think that can happen given that that needs to be vested in a council. So there is some further thinking I think that needs to be looked at. But certainly something that we should open the door at least to the conversation and look at what types of applications may well go down that path. I think what we've talked about here in terms of qualification as experience is a relevant degree and a minimum of 1 year full-time experience in the assessment of land division applications considered appropriate by the registering authority. So for a person to be accredited under that, you would need to be able to demonstrate experience in land division applications. So I won't go into these too much other than to say that for those that are already accredited under a scheme, so we've got here the ABES scheme level 1, you can see how they transition straight across effectively to the new scheme. So under the transitional arrangements you would expect that people who are already accredited on the left hand side could be just registered and transitioned over to the right hand side on the new scheme. For those without the accreditation, they would need to provide evidence of the qualifications and experience like we've mentioned before. They would need to then go through the accreditation process and then be registered to fall into the categories on the right hand side under the new scheme. Very much the same for planning. So if you've got your, if you're already a peer registered planner, you should be able to be transitioned over into an assessment manager, and as shown there on the plan. If you're not accredited under the Institute at the moment, you'll need to provide your evidence, as we've discussed before. So ongoing training and development is something that's really important for all professions, and there are no accreditation schemes that I've been able to find that don't have CPD requirements, and certainly the ABES and Planning Institute and others do have that at the moment. So one of the things, we do have a separate workshop on this which is coming up, which will unpack some of these ideas. But we'll certainly need to look at how there is ongoing training and development for those professions that are having a role in the decision-making process. So whether you're an architect or a lawyer or the like that's on an assessment panel, whether you're an assessment manager or an accredited professional, there will be some core competencies, I think, that you'll need to be able to demonstrate that you are capable of undertaking that role. So the CPD points scheme would be set up around making sure that you can demonstrate that, particular outcomes in your training and development. Insurance is often a matter that comes up, and what we've found to date is that the mutual liability scheme will cover off on council staff who are accredited professionals. For those that aren't within a council, they would need professional indemnity insurance. However, we haven't received a formal documented response to say that that is the case for the mutual liability scheme. That's just what we've had presented to us at the moment. So that's something that we do need to formally document. In terms of fees, there will be some fees associated with the scheme. So the scheme will need to be able to cover the accreditation process, whatever the fees are that are set, to make sure that we have the sufficient resources to do that work. Obviously at the moment, if you're part of the Planning Institute or others, you are already paying a fee to do that, so we wouldn't expect that to be duplicated anyway. Our role would be then, if you're already accredited through another organisation, ours is just the registration component. So if there was a fee attached to that, it would be a registration fee, which would be very nominal. So the fees would only be largely to cost recover those aspects. And of course, I mentioned before that compliance will be important. There is a code of conduct to be out there around accredited professionals, around their behaviour, and a whole lot of work to do on how we make sure that audits and complaints system can be managed. So with that, you've probably heard enough from me. Well, you get a 10-minute break. But we might do, shall we go to questions first and see if we want to have a few questions and then...
Yep. I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, any questions? Hard ones over there.
Yep, go ahead. I've got, do you want a mic? Grab it, sorry.
No, probably not. We did.
You need it so that everyone out there can Thank you.
So my name's Johnny, just be...
I think it is.
Yeah, okay.
It's on.
And I'm here today representing the Institute of Architects. We've got a committee that discusses planning matters, etc., etc. And I've come along today just to... We just want to point out a couple of points. Obviously, the Institute of Architects is the professional body that promotes the use of architects and architecture. It certainly provides CPD to members, and most of our members are registered architects. Some are graduate architects, some are not yet registered. We think there's a dot point missing under the existing industry schemes, that being the fact that most of us, if we can call ourselves architects, have to be registered. So obviously we're registered in South Australia under the Architectural Practice Act 2009. Prior to that, there's been an Architects Act that went back to the 1950s. And it's just worth pointing out there that I guess I know you guys have put in there the AACA, which is owned by all 8 state and territory versions of the Board of Architects here in South Australia.
Mm-hmm.
But we think the Board of Architects should be listed as one of those dot points,
Sure.
given that it's got its own Act of Parliament that controls our registration. It's worth noting that as a registered architect, under the OCBAR legislation, that we actually, by rights, hold the highest builder's licence in the state, just by rights. So, but just by being a registered architect, notwithstanding, I think it's, all the checks and balances are there. You need to make sure people have got relevant experience. But I think it's a key omission that the Board of Architects South Australia is missing from that list. I think that would give us, rightly, a position that we've long held and that is extremely worthy of a bit of a high-level consideration.
Which list? Which particular list? Are you talking about the list?
Under existing industry schemes.
Okay.
So I think you need to. I think it would be remiss, especially given it's an Act of Parliament and all the other things that go with it, that the Board of Architects isn't actually mentioned. It's perfectly reasonable that you've included the AACA.
Yeah.
But
So
in South Australia, obviously we have our own act, as do all the states and territories. And things flow on from that, like the higher level understanding of certainly the building side of things, not to mention design and perhaps some planning matters. But to be a registered architect, you already need to carry, massive PI insurance. So many of the boxes you've got to tick to become an accredited professional are controlled by that Act of Parliament.
Absolutely,
And I think it's a big omission that needs to go in.
Yeah, sure. We can. I think it's a good point, and we can add that in. Absolutely.
If there are any other organisations that you think we've omitted from that list, it's obviously, this is a discussion paper, it's not meant to be the final proposal, which is why we're happy to hear any suggestions that you have for those. I mean, those sorts of reasons are exactly the type of thing we would be relying on, I think, for accreditation. So that is an absolutely reasonable recommendation to make to us, which I think we've received quite happily. So
Yeah.
I think in a tacit form it's there, but given this is South Australian legislation, the Architects Board needs to be included, and a lot of the things that you already tick off on those lists to become accredited are already there, and it should be more of a dovetailing exercise, similar to private certifiers and other professionals that are like hardcore in that space already. So
absolutely. Look, and it wasn't an intentional omission, so we can add that. Absolutely, can add that in. Yeah, look, it's a good point, and we will. We can definitely respond to that. And I think there's quite a few allied professionals. Legal is probably the other one. Law societies. So there's probably others that we have missed. But it's a great opportunity to gather up all those thoughts.
Any other questions? Yeah, sure. Sorry, I'll get to you.
Hi, John Mesrella. I'm here today on behalf of the Australian Institute of Building Surveyors. Given that there are already 3 levels of building certifiers, why is the 4th level of building inspector being introduced, given that the job description basically is pretty much the same as a level 3 building certifier anyway?
Look, it was really just to cover off on that capability to do basic inspections and not need as much experience. But look, we're open to hearing your views on that. If you don't think it's required and that there's a benefit in having it, then we're happy to receive that feedback. It really was to make it simpler and easier to have those activities undertaken, and certainly be interested in the views of local councils on that, as well as yourselves.
Yeah, look, I don't know. It sounds like an idea that may have come from local government, but I'm not sure, because really level 3 building certifiers, the minimum the IBS considers is the required qualification to do inspections of Class 1s and Class 10s.
Right.
And with the added benefit that you can assess those types of buildings as well. I can't really see that this would fit in anywhere really, given that the AIBS probably won't accept it anyway, so we have a whole group of paraprofessionals, I suppose, who are sitting outside the system, and I'm not sure how they're going to fit in with everything else. Basically.
Okay, no, that's fine. I look happy to hear feedback on lots of different views on that, definitely.
Other question? There was one at the back there. Yep.
Thank you. My name's Darren Saar. I'm here representing the City of Prospect today. Anita, I think this is probably more of a clarification point. It's just in relation to the hierarchy, I guess. We've obviously got level 1, 2, 3 and 4, and I'm talking about planning now.
Yep.
I just wanted to confirm or explore a little bit more. For example, as a level 2 assessment panel accredited person, what else can that person do? Is it just sit on a panel, or do they then actually have a level of recognition for lower levels? So I guess, is that an actual progression down the list, or is that really specific?
No, it's not necessarily. I mean, it's sort of hierarchical in a way, but assessment panel members were seen to be quite different, particularly given the number of allied professionals in that space. In some respects, because it's a panel, a group of people, it's quite different to if you're an individual making a one-off decision, which is appealable in the courts. At least your a panel is supported by counsel as well, and an assessment manager. So it was sort of seen as not necessarily if you're qualified for that, do you qualify down. Having said that though, if you were an assessment manager, you would automatically be okay to be on a panel. So if you, because you're coming down, no, I don't think that they can. No, I don't think so. Quite different things.
Any other questions? Yep.
Hello, I'm Noel Guerin representing the Surveying and Spatial Sciences Institute. I guess our situation is quite similar to the architects, where we have a surveyors board under a Surveyors Act, so it's a legislated board, and licensed surveyors fall under the board, but we see the Surveying and Spatial Sciences Institute establishing a specific accreditation scheme for this. So we envisage having an accreditation scheme where we would look at accrediting members and non-members as level 4 land division accredited professionals, and we may also look at having in that scheme a level 2 as allied professionals, but it seems that most of the other allied professionals are going to look at just utilising their existing accreditation. So if you're a registered architect, you would automatically be able to be a level 2 assessment panel member. It just doesn't seem like anybody else is looking at setting up specific accreditation schemes for this. Yep. Yeah. And I guess that's whether PIA is looking at setting up a specific scheme as well, so that if you're a full member or an associate member, do you automatically qualify as a level 3 or level 4? So it's just trying to get an understanding of what the other bodies are looking at doing, and whether that is the expectation of DPTI as well.
I think it's very valuable for those groups to set up those schemes that are specific around accreditation into the planning system, because you will still need to have planning knowledge. Doesn't matter what profession you come from. To come and sit on a panel, you need to understand your role on the panel, and one of the core competencies I think of panel members will have to be around understanding their role as part of a group of people who are decision makers. They need to understand broadly their responsibilities and broadly understand at least the system itself, like when different types of applications fall into different categories, how you run a public hearing, how you then make on-balance judgments against a code. So that no matter who goes on a panel, whether they've got, even the elected member representative is the same, they all need to have some basic core competencies. Now, whether in the first instance we're a little bit more flexible around a transitioning program, or whether there is a requirement to demonstrate those skills in that first round, is something that we need to explore, and I think the next workshop that we're having will start to open that conversation up a little bit. But a person can't just walk into the panel on the first day, be an architect but not have any understanding of the legislation that they'll need to be implementing, or any other occupation and coming in. But having said that, it's good to have diverse skills on panels. I mean, there's no doubt about that. It adds value, especially for those really complex applications we're dealing with now.
But that's your accreditation process.
That's right.
That up.
And looking,
You'll be
yeah,
for the right reason.
that's right. And I think in terms of people setting up their own schemes, once we get some clarity around these are the core competencies you need at each level. So if you're going to be a panel member, these are your core competencies, and your expectation is that your people will be involved largely at that level or whatever other level. You'll need to, in developing your scheme, demonstrate to us that it meets those requirements. So, and also that you've got your own audits and complaints procedure. So you are dealing with basic complaints. So there will be certain requirements, I think, before you could say your scheme is operational under the PDI Act. Now, one thing to note is we don't have to do this all at once. So if your schemes are not ready at the time that the first lot is introduced, it doesn't mean it can't happen. This can certainly grow over time, and I think that's why we've tackled the planning and building first, because they're the ones that we must have, and we must have them straight away. But there is a potential to keep growing the scheme as over time. So we don't have to rush it. It's important that we do it properly.
Any final questions before we... Yeah, sure. One more. Or more, really. Whoever wants to ask.
Thanks. Joel Taggart from Mid-Murray Council. Just a query, Anita, in the level 1 accredited professionals for planners, where's the 6.5 years from? That sort of confused me a bit because it mentions 5 years.
I know. I've been caught out on this one before. My understanding is that to become and I've got Kim here today, she might be able to clarify this further, but there's 1.5 years that you require before you become, as part of that can be while you're graduating, that PIA recognises, and so it ends up being this 1.5 years on top of the 5 years. I think that's how it worked out. Yeah. Is that right?
Quite like that. You
It's
have
similar.
to have 5 years experience.
Sorry.
Hang on a sec.
Sorry, Kim, I'll just get you to speak into the microphone so everyone hears this. Thanks.
You have to have 5 years of experience after you graduate, so you can have just 5, but if you have 5 years experience before you graduate, it works out to be 6.5, if that kind of makes sense. So you have to have 5 after you graduate. It might need to be up to 6.5 if your experience starts before you graduate.
So is that really saying that you can be working as an undergraduate for 1.5 years and get credit for that, plus your 5 years afterwards?
No.
No, okay. It works out 6.5 years. Okay, sure. Absolutely.
Can we
We'll get that.
suggest as well that any other current accrediting bodies or membership bodies effectively that have those sorts of clear delineations that are industry specific to you or profession specific, let us know those things as well, because that would help us guide the sort of really specific criteria for each. That way it's tailored for each profession, and we know who's doing what, and making sure that, as I said, everything's equal across the board for each level. Any more questions? Shall we have the short break before we go into the workshop? Let's do it. Okay.
All right.
So for everyone on live stream, we're having a quick 10-minute break now, meaning that we'll come